Hey, have you guys ever gone into a situation or a relationship seeing a bunch of obvious red flags and then just kind of think maybe the red flags are just decorations? Well, that's what our OP did in the first story today. Anyways, today in my Forever Minecraft world, we're going to get started on building an actual storage room. I've gotten a lot of comments about it, and walking into this room gives me anxiety. With that said, let's get into today's stories. The first story today is from r/nosleep from user SapphireLion15. I found a weird house sitting ad. It might be the best gig I'll ever get. It seemed like easy money. Wanted, weekend house sitter. 3 days, 2 nights. Will pay for food, $500 a day. Call Agatha. Geez, $500 a day, you already know it's going to be like the house from Monster House. I should have been more suspicious, but at the time, I was fresh out of college, up to my ears in debt, and barely managing to pay rent every month. I'd been looking for steady work, basically anything that would let me get groceries without filing for bankruptcy, when I saw the ad stapled to a tree on one of the city streets. I'd house sat for friends and relatives before, and the flyer didn't mention anything about pet sitting, babysitting, or anything like that. Plus, the pay would cover next month's rent, and if I did a good job, I might be able to make the gig a regular thing. I called the number, thinking there was no harm in at least making sure the offer was legit. Agatha turned out to be an older woman who answered on the second ring. She understood that the ad seemed too good to be true and told me that she could prove the offer was valid, giving me an address to look up and her full name to Google. I put her on speaker and did so. As it turned out, Agatha had been a pretty big deal 10 years before. She'd been a fashion critic who was well known for her refined tastes and almost supernaturally good predictions about what would be in every season. Upon retiring, she'd turned into something of a hermit and almost never leaving her house, though the fact that delivery people regularly showed up at her front door proved she was still alive. And she was loaded. Born into a high-class family, she had more money in the bank than some small countries had in their treasuries. While this would be specifically for the weekend, Agatha continued after my Google search, I have a series of trips coming up that I simply cannot put off. If this weekend goes well, I may hire you back for a following weekend for double the current rate. My jaw dropped. I could be making $3,000 in a weekend? At the time, I thought she was either extremely generous or didn't know the value of a dollar. Looking back, I probably should have seen that as a red flag, but I was desperate, so naturally, I accepted the job. I was to arrive on Friday morning, specifically at 10 o'clock sharp. Once I'd stepped through the front door, I wasn't allowed to leave the house again until Sunday afternoon, when Agatha would return. Thus, I was expected to bring everything I would possibly need for my 3-day stay. Odd as I thought it was, I was not about to tick off the lady who could single-handedly end a few of my money troubles. Agatha's house was an absolutely gorgeous mansion. It practically screamed old money. It was 3 stories tall, painted a pristine white. A balcony overlooked the front lawn. The lawn and flower beds were immaculately cared for. A golden statue made up of numerous brass instruments stood proud at the center of the garden. All in all, I was starting to think this gig would be worth it. But I had to pause when I saw the dolls. Standing on poles guarding either side of the porch were 2 gigantic dolls. They looked like they were made of some kind of sackcloth, as their skin reminded me of burlap. Both of them were about 6 feet tall, though the poles they were attached to made them seem at least a foot taller. They didn't have mouths, but there were 2 massive black circles embroidered onto their faces to act like eyes. They had stringy black yarn to act as their hair. Though how said yarn hair hadn't rotted away due to exposure to the elements was anyone's guess. They were made up to resemble a man and a woman. The male doll's yarn hair was made up to look like a mop-top haircut, and he was dressed in a black Victorian-style suit. The female doll was wearing a mauve ballet-style dress with black leggings, and her yarn hair was tied up into a sloppy bun. Both had a very Burton-esque feel to them. As surprised as I was to see the dolls, especially because of how out of place they were, I shrugged and played it off as a weird interest Agatha had. After all, she'd hardly be the first rich person to have an eccentric hobby. Agatha all but pulled me inside when I knocked on the door. She was a sharply dressed woman in at least her late 60s. I noticed that a suitcase was sitting beside her. She looked satisfied to see that I'd arrived on time and had a suitcase and duffel with me. "Got everything you need?" she asked in lieu of a greeting. "Everything I'll need," I reassured her. "Good, very good. Now, oh, my taxi's here." I looked out the still open front door to see a taxi pull up right beside my beat-up Prius. "I'll pay you what you're owed as soon as I get back," she told me as she picked up her suitcase. "I don't have time to go over everything, so I left a list of rules for you on the kitchen table. Follow it to the letter and everything will be fine. See you Sunday." With that, she went out the door, shutting it behind her. I blinked, wondering if that was normal behavior for someone leaving their clearly expensive house to a total stranger. Setting my bags down in the foyer, I walked through the gargantuan house until I found the kitchen. As she'd promised, a list had been written down. It was written on custom stationery and left next to a sticky note that read, "Please follow all rules." I dutifully read over the list. Some of the instructions were rather self-explanatory, but others were just plain weird. "Please feed the goldfish in the library. The food is in a jar on the cabinet next to the tank. Just 1 pinch a day. 2. Every night at 9 o'clock sharp, you must be in the living room, staring out the picture window. You must watch everything they do. Do not look away. They like an audience. When they bow to you, clap 3 times and close the curtains. Be sure to open them again in the morning." Bro, how do you go from feed the goldfish to make sure you watch them? Like, what? No. Then rule 3. Please don't smoke or vape in the house. If you must, please only smoke or vape on the balcony. If you touch any books in the library, please put them back where you found them. If you are injured or feel sick, sleep on the couch on the back patio. Be there by 9 and you'll feel better by morning. On Saturday night, leave a paper plate of frozen crinkle-cut carrot slices on the welcome mat. Be sure you do this by 6 o'clock at the latest. Don't worry about getting the paper plate. They never leave leftovers. Okay. 7. Ross the gardener comes on Saturday morning. Jeb, the special gardener, comes every Saturday evening. Do not speak to either of them, and do not let Jeb know that I'm not home. 8. Do not make any noise while watching them. They will excuse a sneeze or coughing fit, but anything else will make them unhappy. The streaming service is yours to use as you like. If you order any pizza or food for delivery, leave a note telling me where it was at and what it cost, and I'll cover it. Help yourself to anything in the fridge. The rules about feeding the fish, not smoking, and picking up after myself were easy to understand and follow. Fish were easy to please, and I'd never been a smoker, but the other rules were weird. Yeah, to say the least. Still, like I said, they were all pretty easy to follow, and Agatha was being more than generous. I decided to just grin and bear it. Though I have to admit that the constant mentions of they left me with a knot in my stomach. Friday was spent exploring the house and finding all the rooms listed. The library was on the 2nd floor, right next to my guest room, which looked like a luxury hotel suite. The back patio was a fully covered and furnished deck, with glass doors and windows keeping Mother Nature out, and a connected heating and AC unit keeping it comfortable. The living room was a surprisingly big room. You could have parked a car in there and still had room for 10 people. The picture window mentioned in the list was so big it took up most of the wall, and was framed by red velvet curtains, which greatly reminded me of the curtains used in theaters. After a dinner of ordered pizza and a Mountain Dew, I saw that it was 10 till 9. Too curious to disobey, I went to the living room and looked out the picture window. The sun had set by that point, with the porch light and various lights in the garden illuminating the front. Then, at 9 on the dot, just when I was starting to wonder what the big deal was, it happened. The 2 dolls I'd seen earlier jumped off their posts. There was no warning. One moment they were still and lifeless, and the next they were moving like it was the most normal thing in the world. The male doll offered its arm to the female one, who took it delicately. They walked over onto a bare patch of grass, one right in my line of sight. The male doll touched the statue of the orchestra I'd seen earlier. Eerie, unearthly music filled the air. Then, as I watched, they began to dance. It wasn't a waltz or a salsa or any kind of dance I'd seen before, but it was undeniably dancing. They stepped in time to the music, never looking away from one another. At times, the male doll would dip or whirl the female doll around before they began slow dancing once again. My heart hammered as I struggled to rationalize what I was seeing. My eyes were frozen on the pair. Finally, the music tapered off. The dolls stopped their dance and turned to face me. They'd known I was there all along. I was as still as a statue as their black, unreadable eyes focused on me. Then, perfectly in sync, they bowed at me. Remembering the rules, I gave 3 loud claps and closed the curtains as quickly as possible. Then, I got out of that room as fast as I could. I made a break for my guest room, avoiding all windows. What if they were still watching the house? And taking the 2 steps at a time. I slammed the door when I got to my room. Breathing heavily, like a scared little kid, I darted under the bed, shaking. How in the name of sanity had that just happened? Did Agatha know it would happen? I had just pulled my phone out of my pocket, wondering what I should do, when it buzzed. It was a text from Agatha. I know you must be frightened, but don't be. They only want an audience, nothing more. Just follow the rules and you'll be safe. I sent her a few texts, most of them asking or really begging for answers, but she never replied. I spent most of that night under the blanket in my guest room, hugging my plush sea turtle and not daring to look out the window, lest I see one of those dolls staring at me. Morning eventually came. Exhausted from a fearful sleepless night, I trudged down the stairs to make some coffee. I froze when I heard something moving outside, until I remembered the list. One of the gardeners always came Saturday mornings, and I wasn't supposed to speak to them. Tempted as I was to see anyone real, to try and convince myself I wasn't crazy, I decided to abide by the rules, which meant I had to open those living room curtains. I held my breath as I pulled them apart, and wasn't quite sure how I felt when I saw that the dolls were back on their poles, like nothing had ever happened. I had a bowl of cornflakes and a cup of very strong coffee for breakfast, deciding to try and binge comfort films until I could convince myself that it had all been some kind of wild dream. Unfortunately, that plan was dashed when, while walking back to the TV room, I tripped on my own discarded sneaker. While my landing was painful, it was nothing compared to the sprained ankle I got in the process. I bit my arm to keep from screaming and managed to hobble back into the kitchen for some ice. I wound up still going on a movie binge, but now it was because I was confined to the couch. I was wondering how I was going to get up the stairs that night if my foot was a mess until I remembered. According to Agatha, I had to sleep on the back patio if I was hurt, which meant that I wouldn't have to see those creepy dolls. While I still didn't know what was going on, I felt much better thinking that I might have a more normal night. I spent the rest of the day following the instructions as best as I could, leaving the chopped carrots on the welcome mat after the special gardener left. I understood why he was the special gardener when I saw him dusting those freaky dolls. After I'd fed the fish, I went about my nighttime routine, made more difficult with the busted ankle. By 8:50, I'd gotten myself settled on the back patio. The patio's couch was as soft as a bed, and there were enough pillows for me to feel comfortable even after I used 2 of them to prop up my foot. After taking a blanket from the linen closet, I was ready to get a full night's sleep. I had just closed my eyes, starting to drift off, and then I heard it. That eerie, unearthly music. I pulled the blanket over my face, too afraid to think of doing anything else. As I listened, the movie stopped mid-note. I froze, wondering what that meant. For a few minutes, it was dead quiet. Then I heard it. 2 pairs of unnaturally light footsteps. They walked in sync, slowly, as though they weren't in any kind of hurry, and they were walking towards the porch. Terrified tears rolled down my cheeks as I silently begged them not to come near me. The steps started walking onto the deck, and then the door to the back patio opened. My heart was in my mouth as I heard 2 sets of feet approach. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Not with my... The blanket was ripped off of me. The female doll was standing right next to my head, holding the blanket in one hand as she stared at me. I was about to let out a scream when her hand dropped the blanket and clamped over my mouth. The other hand settled on my hair, She started rhythmically moving her hand through my hair like she was petting me. Her eyes never left mine. 2 hands grabbed my bad foot. I shot a glance towards the foot of the couch and saw the male doll holding at my swollen limb. Much like the female doll, he was staring right at me. He lifted his hand and snapped, and I lost consciousness. When I woke up, the sun was out. Everything that had happened came back to me in a flash, and I looked down at my injured foot. Only it wasn't injured anymore. It looked like I'd never even been hurt. I got off the couch and stood on it to test it. It was perfectly fine. Agatha's text came back to me. They only want an audience, nothing more. Just follow the rules and you'll be safe. I guess part of keeping their audience meant keeping them healthy. Feeling physically better after a night of rest, I waited impatiently for Agatha to come back at 3 that day. When she finally walked through the door that afternoon, she had a resigned look on her face. She dropped her bags on the floor and gave me a tired smile. I'll unpack, make us a pot of tea, and explain what I can. That was all the answer I got until she unpacked everything and put on her electric kettle. Only when we both had a steaming cup of chamomile in our hands did she start to explain. I don't know where they truly came from, she began, or even what they truly are. But when I turned 50, my health began to deteriorate. And with my wealth, I was a prime target for thieves or home invaders. Jeb's brother reached out to me shortly after my 50th birthday. He claimed he had a way of making sure I was always healthy and protected. All I had to do was give them an audience. The day after I agreed, I woke up to find those 2 standing at attention in my yard. All their seller told me was that I must not remove them, and that I must always watch them dance at night. She took a sip from her tea. At first, I was as confused and petrified as you. But then, when I came down with a dreadful flu bug a week after I got them, they came into my house in the middle of the night and cured me. Since then, I've realized that they truly are protectors, as long as you serve as their audience. That's why I almost never leave. Someone has to be here to make sure they have an audience, that they don't stop protecting the house and whoever stays here. But last week, my brother-in-law was killed in a car accident, and my sister was distraught. I had to go stay with her to make sure she was alright. That's why I was willing to pay a complete stranger so much money just to watch the place. Our conversation went on for a little while longer, but in the end, I more or less got it. I was still creeped out by the whole thing, but after the dolls had healed me, well, I wasn't as scared as before. Thus, I became Agatha's regular house sitter. It was a fair bargain. She finally got to travel and visit people she hadn't seen in years, while I got a steady, lucrative income in exchange for watching her place, and as a result, the dancing dolls, whenever she called me. I'd been her regular house sitter for about a year when Melanie called. Melanie was the kind of sibling you wish you didn't have to associate with. She'd been a little gremlin since the day she was born, and her behavior had gotten worse with age. It didn't matter how many times my parents put her in a timeout or she got detention in school. No mistake she made was her fault. Anything anyone else got was something she had to have, and anything that didn't go her way was worth screaming herself hoarse over. When I got into college, she'd thrown a fit about not being able to go to college herself until they let her take an early admissions test. When she passed, I still think she bought the answers off someone, she packed her bags and went straight to the enrollment office. She immediately made herself the bane of everyone on campus's existence. Any time she wasn't in class was spent hooking up with frat boys or getting blackout drunk. She constantly skipped classes, mouthed off to teachers whenever she bothered to show up, and she wound up having to rent an apartment off campus when she yelled transphobic slurs at a trans man and got herself banned from the dorms. She was eventually expelled, and my parents refused to let her move back in with them until she learned how to act like an adult. She swore she'd show them by marrying rich. In 3 years since she'd made that deal, she'd gone through 4 different boyfriends and 9 different jobs, most of them at fast food joints, refusing to admit defeat. She'd started trying to mooch off of any relative that didn't already hate her. So it shouldn't have surprised me when she called, talking in the sickly sweet way she always did when she wanted either money or a favor. And he, totally left me for no reason and said I would never get a job at his dad's modeling studio, she whined, finishing a clearly falsified story and giving a few fake sniffles. So anyway, if you know any way I could get a job... Sorry, Melanie, I can't help you job hunt. I cut her off as I finished stuffing clothes and my plush turtle into my duffel. I have something really important to do this weekend. Liar, she screamed through the phone. Mom said you landed a cushy job working for a rich lady. I want in. I sighed. Mom didn't have a filter and always blabbed to everyone about everything. It's not that simple. This really is a one-person job and... Great, so quit and I'll take it. What's the address? I hung up. Melanie only ever heard what she wanted to hear. Given how completely insane my sister had always been, I really should have predicted what happened next. Agatha's brother was getting hip replacement surgery, and since it was last minute, she was paying me $7,000 to watch her house for a whole week. Obviously, I said yes. $7,000? $7,000 to house sit in a mansion and watch some inanimate objects dance for a couple minutes every night? Sold. Give me the address. The rules hadn't really changed, and by then I had them memorized. I thought I knew what to expect. Other than keeping the fish fed and watching the dolls dance, my days watching Agatha's house were quiet. What I didn't expect was the knock on the door I got on the first evening of my latest week there. Agatha hardly ever got visits that weren't from people she'd hired, so naturally I was startled. I looked at the clock. It was 8:30. I thought I'd have enough time to shoo away whoever was at the door before the dolls came alive. Unfortunately, when I opened the door, preparing to see a Jehovah's Witness or perhaps a salesman, I found my sister. Hey Tiffany, thanks again for the job. Melanie didn't let me say that I had not gotten her a job, simply strolling in with her baby pink suitcase and self-centered attitude. She began chattering about how she managed to manipulate Mom into telling her what city I lived in and the name of the woman I was working for. From there, she just stalked Agatha's name online until she found out where she lived. From there, she started talking about how excited she was to work for a fashion critic and how she was more than qualified to critique people's outfits. Side note, guys, this girl is a damn psychopath, and I would push her outside when they started dancing, so the dolls would, find her and, I don't know, get rid of her. I finally found my voice, though I had to shout to make myself heard. Melanie, I did not find a job for you, and I'm definitely not giving up my job for you. You need to go. She froze. I hoped that I'd gotten through to her and glanced at the clock. 8:50. I had to work fast. Maybe I could promise to book her a hotel room and... You self-centered ass. Excuse me? You know how badly I need a job. You knew I was perfect for the job of fashion critic, and you wouldn't even give up your job for me. You're so selfish. Melanie, you've lost it. Why don't you... Are you trying to get rid of me? You are, I can tell. Mom and Dad got rid of me. Grandma got rid of me when I sold her car. Uncle Jake got rid of me when I broke his microwave. My boyfriend left me. My bosses all hated me. Now, even my own sister? Well, tough. You're not getting rid of me that easy. You know, maybe if absolutely nobody wants you in their presence, maybe it's time to, take a look in the mirror, maybe? See what you can work on with yourself. Anyways, let's continue. She grabbed one of the antique bottles on Agatha's shelves and smashed it against the wall, sending glass shards to the floor before she came at me with the broken bottle. My self-preservation instincts took over and I ran for the first exit I saw, the back door. As I ran, the doll's unearthly music began. I paled. I was too late. What would happen now that I'd broken the rule? Come here, you family betrayer. I forgot about the dolls as my sister came at me, screaming like a banshee. I tripped over one of the patio's footstools, landing flat on my back. She was on top of me in seconds, her eyes wide with madness as she tried to stab the broken bottle down into my neck. I pushed her back with all my strength, my heart beating 1,000 miles a minute. She was stronger than me, stronger than I would have expected. She started pressing the bottle against my neck, cutting into the skin. Then Melanie saw something behind me and froze. What the... She was lifted off of me. My hands flew to my neck, gasping as I pressed against the cuts. I didn't have any trouble breathing, and to my relief, the cuts were only flesh wounds. Before I could get up, I felt someone's arms lifting off me. I turned, but for once, I was relieved to see the female doll. Muffled screaming turned my attention to the male doll, who was holding my sister. The female doll continued to hold me as she watched her partner walk out the patio, the struggling Melanie in his arms. From the front yard came the sound of the eerie music. With the female doll and myself as the audience, the male doll held Melanie in a bridal carry as he went to stand on a bare patch of grass. Then he began a slow, single dance. It was a bit like a tap dance, only made more complicated due to carrying a struggling woman. As he spun her, though, Melanie seemed to enter a type of trance. He set her down, and she stood, a dopey smile on her face. Their dance became something more akin to a waltz, with him leading her in one dizzying turn after another. When the music began to crescendo, he took her into his arms again. She stared at him with wonder, a big smile on her face. The female doll then turned, making sure I was facing the door into the house instead of the male doll and my sister. There was the sound of ripping seams, then a blood-curdling scream, Melanie's scream. Then, nothing. The female doll set me on the back patio's couch as the male doll came back. He was alone. The female doll put a hand on my throat, examining the cuts. Then she snapped, and I was out cold. The next morning, I turned on the news to find that the body of a woman had been found in the woods nearly a mile away. Her broken-down car had been right next to her. Judging by the state of the corpse, the general consensus was that she'd been driving through the woods, decided to stop for whatever reason, and had been mauled to death by some sort of animal, with most people thinking it was a bear. I had a feeling I knew, but I wasn't about to say anything, seeing as how Melanie managed to tick off anyone who knew her for more than 30 seconds. No one was grieving especially hard. Agatha heard the news and called me. Apparently, that wasn't the first time the dolls had come to someone's rescue. "Just be glad they enjoy an audience," she told me. Her tone was grim. "If they ever find that you had no reason to miss a performance..." A lump formed in my throat as I realized what she meant. Why am I saying all of this now? Agatha drafted her will yesterday. She's decided that she'll leave her house to me, to do with as I please. I've already decided to sell it. The money from such a sale would pay off the rest of my loans, and it's not like I need such a big house anyway. I finally managed to talk to Jeb, wondering if he could take the dolls when I sold the house. He said it was impossible. The house was now their home. It'll be a long while before Agatha passes, especially since she has a guaranteed way to recover if she's sick or injured. But when the time comes, be warned. If you happen to see a fancy mansion for sale and are told a list of rules that must be followed, follow them. They won't like it if they lose their audience. You know, guys, I think I would be just fine living in this house. I don't know about you guys. Let me know down in the comments if you could live here. But I feel like I definitely could, because if you can live in a mansion, you never get hurt or sick. I mean, or if you do, they fix you overnight. And all you do is watch some creepy dolls dance. I feel like that's worth. It sounds like they've been dancing for so long. They're probably really good dancers. Anyways, huge shout out to this author, Sapphire Lion 15. Thanks for letting me read this story. It was really good. Go check out some more of their stuff. The link to their Reddit profile is going to be down in the description. Anyways, let's go ahead and get on with the next story today. The next story is from No Cardiologist 1353, also from r/no sleep. It's called Something Keeps Trying to Get Invited into My House. Don't ever knock on my front door. Don't even try it. If you're a salesman, keep stepping. If you're a Girl Scout, move on to the next house. We don't care if you see us through the window or hear us behind the door. We will never open it. We don't know who we can trust anymore. All we know is that whatever's outside can't enter unless we let it. It all started about a week ago, when I was home alone. My wife and 2 boys were spending the week at her mother's place in Phoenix while I begrudgingly stay behind so my boss wouldn't think of my name when our company's downsizing inevitably reached our branch. In my heart, I longed to be soaking up the sun with my family, but Reality found me sacrificing my vacation days in hopes of keeping my job. 5 o'clock came and put an end to Monday, and I didn't linger around the office for a second. On my way home, I stopped by my favorite Chinese takeout. If I couldn't enjoy the company of my family, I could at least enjoy the company of General Tso. Pulling my car into the garage, I quickly changed into sweatpants and a plain t-shirt, slipped on my slippers, and settled into my favorite lazy boy recliner. As I flipped on the TV and opened my takeout, I sighed away the day's stress and prepared to relax. It had barely been 15 minutes before my peace was interrupted by the loud sound of the doorbell. I rolled my eyes and muttered to myself, "Great, just great." When I opened the door, I was met by one of the strangest sights I had ever seen. Before me, on the threshold of my home, was a salesman. Not a salesman you might see wandering around modern neighborhoods, dressed in bright polos, khaki shorts, trying to sell you solar panels or a new roof. No, the salesman before me looked like he had stepped out of the 1960s. He wore black, perfectly polished formal dress shoes, a light gray three-piece tweed suit, and a matching gray fedora. The man himself was the perfect picture of the 1960s man. He was tall and thin, his brown hair was skillfully cut and styled, his face cleanly shaved, and his teeth were perfectly straight and dazzlingly white. In one hand, he held a brown leather briefcase, and at his side was a very old Hoover vacuum. As our eyes met, he smiled, removed his fedora, and in the quick yet soothing voice of an old-fashioned baseball announcer, he said, "Good evening, sir. Always a pleasure to see a fellow citizen. I'm here on behalf of the Hoover Company. If I could, I'd like to come inside and take a moment to demonstrate to you the marvels of the modern home vacuum." I couldn't help but chuckle a little. "Wow," I said, "that's some get-up. I feel sorry for you having to wear that in this heat. Is Hoover celebrating an anniversary or something?" The salesman didn't drop the act. "No, sir. Nothing special. Just the regular Hoover treatment. May I come in?" I squinted my eyes slightly. No. I feel like this is the response most of us would have. At this, his smile dropped. He stared blankly for a moment before saying, "You won't let me in?" "No," I said again. "Why not?" He asked in a quieter voice. "Look, man, this is my house, and I don't need a reason to not let you in." He stared blankly at me again before whispering, "Please?" Guys, I know it's scary stories, but come on, that's funny. I don't know about you guys, but I don't care about the repercussions. I'm letting him in. He said please. Like what? You're gonna turn him away? Anyways, let's continue. I could feel my temper getting the best of me. "No, now get lost." With that, I slammed the door in his face and backed up into the entryway. But through the fogged glass of the front door, I could still see his silhouette just standing there on the porch. I held my breath and stared, hoping he would leave. After about 3 minutes, he hadn't moved, and I lost my temper. I swung the door open and yelled into his wide smile, "Get off my porch right now, or I'm calling the cops." He stared. His smile only seemed to widen. After half a minute, he walked backwards off the porch. His eyes never left mine, nor did his smile lower until he reached the sidewalk. At that point, he turned and walked off. I couldn't help but feel uncomfortable, so I locked the front door as I returned to the recliner. I finished my dinner, enjoyed a few hours of TV shows, and headed off to bed. At 1 a.m., the silence of the house was shattered by the doorbell. I don't know how long it had been ringing before it woke me. Barely awake, I stumbled out of bed and into the hallway, praying that this was a dream. As I approached the front door, a bright light sent a long shadow of a man into my house. Opening the door, the light was blinding, and it took a moment for my sleepy eyes to adjust. As they did, the figure before me spoke in a loud, authoritative voice. "Sir, I'm with the police. We received a complaint from this address earlier today. May I come in and discuss the details?" My mind was barely keeping up, and in confusion I replied, "Wait, what are you talking about?" "Just following up on the call we received. May I come in and take your statement?" My confused mind began to catch up. I never called the police today. I know for a fact that no one else here did either. The figure was silent for a moment before saying, "All the same, sir. If I could come in, we could clear this all up." It was at this point that I noticed the man's uniform. It was old. The type of uniform worn back in the 80s. In fact, the man's entire appearance was like something out of a police TV show. The worn dark aviator sunglasses and his face was home to a thick handlebar mustache. I looked at him and asked, "What's your badge number?" He didn't reply. "Do you have a warrant?" "No," came the simple answer. "Then you can't come in." "If I had one, would you let me in?" I didn't answer, just slammed and locked the door. The man banged his fist on the door for about 15 minutes before giving up and leaving. And after calming down for about an hour, I finally fell back asleep. When morning came, I found it easy to convince myself that last night's interaction was nothing but an odd dream. I blamed it on the cheap Chinese food, but after a short shower and simple breakfast, I soon forgot about the event. Work was nothing special, just the daily grind of an underpaid accountant for a shrinking company. I missed my family and wished more than anything that I'd gone with them. 5 o'clock came and I didn't linger. Soon I was trapped in the prison of rush hour. It was 6:30 by the time I pulled into my quiet neighborhood. As I reached my house, I noticed a figure standing on my porch. It was a man. He was dressed in a light gray jumpsuit, similar to the ones a janitor or plumber might wear in a movie. He stood facing the door. One hand was raised and limply, yet constantly knocked on the door. "No way," I said in disbelief as I passed the front of the house to the garage on the side of the house. As I passed by, the man noticed, and his head slowly turned to me and followed me as I disappeared around the corner. The last thing I saw before the car went behind the house was the man leaving the porch and walking over towards the garage. "Not again," I muttered aloud. By the time I parked and exited the car, he was already there, standing just outside the open garage door, as if an invisible wall stopped him from coming any closer. "Hello," he said in a cheerful voice. "We received a call earlier about a busted pipe, and no one has answered the door. May I come in and take a look?" I stared at him as he spoke, and not once did I see him blink. A wide smile crossed his face as he finished, as if it was his default expression. No one called you. No one has even been here all day, so get out of here," I said, somewhat annoyed. The corners of his mouth twitched slightly, and through the gritted teeth of his smile, he said, "So you're alone here?" I swallowed and replied harshly, "That's none of your business. Now leave." At that, as if a switch was flipped, he returned to the expression and movements of a charismatic tradesman. "Really, sir, I must insist. Just let me come in and take a look. Dealing with a flooded basement isn't a relaxing way to spend the evening. No, I must insist that you leave right now, and don't ever come back." His unblinking eyes narrowed at that. The unreal smile returned as he backed away. As he reached the end of my driveway, I heard him quietly say, "See you later." With a loud sigh, I closed the garage door and headed upstairs to change out of my work clothes and shower. I'd hoped to grill that night for dinner. I'd set out some steaks to defrost when I left for work that morning, but shortly after I got out of the shower, it began to rain. Not wanting to give up on my dreams of a good steak, I decided to just leave the grill in the garage, pull out one of the cars, and leave the garage door open to let the smoke out. The smell of the cooking meat, mixed with the cool, earthy smell of the rain, calmed my nerves and momentarily made me forget about both work and the strange solicitors. Just as the steaks finished cooking, the storm outside became noticeably stronger. I soon noticed a figure running in the heavy rain. It took me a second to realize that they were running right towards my garage. It appeared to be a young girl, no older than 12 years old. She ran as fast as she could, but when she reached the threshold of the garage, she stopped instantly. I glared cautiously at her. Even in the rain, it was obvious that she was crying. For a moment, I let my guard down. I had many strange visitors over the last few days, but this was just a little girl who needed help. So I don't know about you guys, but at this point in the story, I'm thinking vampires, right? Like, that's the only thing that makes sense with them having to be invited to go across the threshold into the house. Anyways, we'll find out together. Let's go ahead and continue. I subconsciously moved closer to the entry of the garage. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" I asked as my fatherly instincts overtook me. Through sobs and snuffles, she replied weakly, "They're chasing me. They want to hurt me. Please help me." I took another step closer. "Who's chasing you? How can I help?" At that question, a thin grin broke across the girl's face, and she said, "Can I come inside? I don't think they'll find me if I'm in there." At that, something in the back of my mind broke through my fatherly concern. Something wasn't right. I stared intently at the little girl's face. Her unblinking eyes gazed back. A chill ran down my back as I realized that I'd recognized this girl. Everyone in this area knew who she was. This was the Johnson girl. Last summer, she was snatched while riding her bike to a friend's house. The whole community searched for weeks. Her devastated parents regularly pled with her kidnapper on the local news. For months, there was no sign of her, but at the end of September, her body was found, floating face down in a nearby reservoir. The thing in front of me wore the same clothes the Johnson girl was wearing when her body was found. A white long-sleeve shirt, and dark blue jeans with mud stains around the knees. The smile on its face widens as we stared into each other's eyes. The fingers of its left hand twitched violently. My throat was dry as I squeaked out one question. "What are you?" At this, the thing violently tilted its head to the side before cheerfully replying through clenched teeth, "I'm a little girl." Instantly, her face dropped the smile as the facade of a distressed crying girl returned. "And I really need to hide in your house. Please, mister, they'll get me." Cold sweat ran down my forehead as I slowly shook my head no. "Go away," I stuttered. At this, a low growl escaped the little girl's lips as malice filled her eyes. For one terrible second, neither of us moved. Then, in a flash, she lurched towards me, but as she tried to break the plane of the doorway, she froze as if she hit an unseen wall. She screamed, "Let me in," over and over again. She swung her fist forward as if banging on an invisible door. I didn't even bother to take the stake off the grill as I turned, hit the garage door button, and ran into the house. That night was awful. Whatever was outside my house didn't leave. Instead, it spent the night, screaming and banging on every door and window of my house. The scream was terrible. It was angry and primal. With every bang, I feared the windows would shatter or the doors would give out, but they didn't. They creaked and shifted, but they held. I couldn't sleep. The thing wouldn't let me. Even on the second floor, I heard violent bangs and angry screams at my bedroom window. Every now and then, I'd see its shadow under the lights of a passing car. Sometimes it was the shadow of a little girl, and sometimes it was the shadow of a fedora-wearing salesman or a police officer. But no matter the shadow, the screams remained the same raspy, inhuman screams that I first heard in the garage. I spent the night huddled in the upstairs bathroom, as its violent fit shook the foundation of the house. Morning came, and exactly 30 minutes after sunrise, the banging and screaming stopped. After a night of noise, the house seemed unnaturally quiet. Slowly, I left the bathroom and cautiously peered out of the bedroom window. Outside, I saw nothing unusual. It seemed to be an ordinary day in my ordinary neighborhood. Making my way downstairs, I found myself checking every window and every door. But I saw nothing. Not so much as a scratch on the glass or a damaged plant in the yard. Nothing that pointed to the noise from the night before. I felt like I was losing my mind, but I didn't want to leave the house. I frantically called my boss, claiming I was sick. I told him I probably won't be in for a few days. Sarcastically, he replied, "Just know I'll remember this in a few months." I didn't care. Being laid off was the least of my concerns. The next few days were a nightmare. Every evening around 7 p.m., a figure would stand on the porch and knock on the door. "Hello? Anyone in there? May I come in? Please?" Sometimes it asked in the voice of a little girl. Sometimes it pretended to be the police, or it would speak in the smooth voice of a salesman. It had some new voices, too. "May I come in?" asked an elderly woman. "Come on, man, let me in," said a teenage boy. Sometimes it tried accents, but it always got them wrong. One time it started in a Russian accent and finished in a heavy Hispanic accent. Its British accent was strangely mixed with a deep Southern accent, but it kept trying. With every passing hour, it grew more angry and more violent. The calm tone slowly grew angry and eventually would scream. The knocking would turn to banging. But every morning, 30 minutes after sunrise, it would all stop. I hadn't slept in days, and I was terrified to go outside. Dread was growing in my mind because I knew soon I had to go out. My wife and sons were flying home. My boys started high school baseball practice this coming week, and they needed to get back in time to be ready. And I was supposed to pick them up from the airport. I knew I couldn't ask my wife to get an Uber. I would never be able to trust that they were real unless I saw them exiting the plane myself. So, with shaking hands, I used the button to open the garage. I stood and watched for a few moments, but no one walked by. After building up some courage, I hopped in my car, closed the garage, and headed off towards the airport. It was so good to see my wife and boys. After several sleepless nights and days of isolation, just their presence was a breath of fresh air. I pulled my wife in for a hug. As we separated, she looked me over. "Dear, you look terrible," she said, full of concern. "I'll explain later," I said with a weak smile. "It's just really good to see you." She smiled and quickly kissed me on the cheek. "We missed you," she said. On the car ride home, I tried to explain the situation to them. I told them that for the last couple of days, strange people had been trying to get into our house. I'm sure I sounded crazy as I tried to tell them about the vacuum salesman from the 60s or Little Dead Girls. When I told them about the banging and screaming in the night and suggested that maybe we spend a few nights in a hotel, my wife looked over to me and gently laid her hand on my arm before saying, "Are you feeling okay, honey?" My youngest son jokingly said, "Have you been smoking weed, Dad?" My wife quickly interjected, "I'm sure you're just stressed and haven't been sleeping well. I'll be sure to rub your shoulders tonight." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. After all, they would see what I was talking about at 7. The afternoon moved by slowly as my family unpacked their things. I found myself packing a bag. I wanted to be ready to leave in the morning after they experienced what I have. 7 p.m. came, but to my surprise, no strange visitors came with it. I sat near the front door looking at my clock, but nothing. No knocking, no voices from the other side of the door. It was surprisingly normal. At 8:30, I let out a cautious sigh of relief. Maybe it was gone. Maybe the events of this week were just some sort of elaborate prank by the neighbors. I paced around the house till 9:45, until my wife asked when I was coming to bed. As promised, my wife rubbed my shoulders. Before long, I couldn't keep my weary eyes open any longer, and I drifted off to sleep. In the morning, I felt refreshed. I hadn't slept in days. And that night, I slept all the way through with no interruptions. I smiled and stretched, thinking to myself, I'm so glad that's over. I made my way to the kitchen, where I made myself a cup of coffee and some toast, which I enjoyed while scrolling on Facebook. A few minutes later, my oldest son came down the stairs and into the kitchen. He looked at me with a big grin on his face. I nodded and said, "Morning." He went to the cupboard to grab a bowl for cereal, and as he did, with his back towards me, he said, "Hey Dad, why did you need me to let you in last night?" "Oh yeah, you guys are cooked." Yeah, so his teenage son clearly let it go right in one ear and out the other. Don't let anybody in, even if they look like me. I was thinking the whole time that the family he picked up from the airport wasn't actually his family, but that didn't seem to be the case. I like this comment saying the real villain of this story is your boss. Honestly, that's such facts. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. If you liked today's video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe as it helps me out greatly. Huge shout out to my channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link's going to be in the description. However, it is not at all required, completely optional. And with that, I will see you in tomorrow's video. Peace. 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 Peace.